I wanted to talk a bit about metrics, because what I see and what I perceive coaching agile teams is that they really get stuck in about 2 or 3 different metrics, and then they do no more, and they don't start to expand the use of metrics to enable them to improve or learn or whatever. So I wanted to do that as a session. We're not going to talk about specific metrics, but just more about how the metrics are used. Okay, so that's why I called it meaningful agile metrics. Okay, so those of you who don't know me, I've been involved in agile since 2007. I am what they call a disciplined agile senior scrum master, which is basically a program manager or release train engineer using disciplined agile. I'm a safe SBC. I've done certified scrum master exam for some time, and I'm ICP accredited, and I am just about becoming a disciplined agile value stream consultant instructor, which sounds very grand, but it basically means looking at value streams and optimizing teams' performance by looking at the value stream approach. I'm also a Kata consultant, which means I'm on the panel of international experts, and I write every month about things agile, and I publish papers on a regular basis. I've just published something called the Agile Coaches Cookbook, which some of you I know some of you have got hold of, and I've sent some to some of you. And this week we published on LeanPub the Agile Lineout, which is an alternative to Scrum, and that started to take. I published it sort of early morning yesterday, and we've got like 15 or 20 copies sold in less than 24 hours. So I'm extremely pleased with that, but I'll give you more details about that a bit later on. I'm currently leading an agile transformation in British Telecom. I've got 5,000 people in my division that I'm leading in terms of the transformation approach. And by leading, I mean what I'm doing is working with the guiding coalition to actually do the transformational activities. I'm coaching coaches. I've got about 50 agile squads in my area. And I'm also supporting another 50 in an adjacent area to my team. So quite a lot involved in British Telecom at the moment, both in technology teams and non-software teams. So it's very, very interesting from that perspective. So I called this Radiators, Dashboards and Status Reports, and quite a lot of people will say, well, that's the same thing, isn't it? But I wanted to draw out some differences between them, because I think they have subtly different uses, and I wanted to talk about that. A radiator, if you've not seen one, they're quite impressive. They tend to be in a team's working area. They are a big picture of what the team is doing. They have a variety of graphical and non-graphical content. They may well have some scope statements. There may well be some slogans from sponsors and so on. But basically, that radiator is used for learning, basically used for the team to recall and for the team to make sure that they're staying on track and so on. In dashboard is slightly different, because a dashboard, think of a dashboard in a car or an aircraft, and basically what it is an at a glance control mechanism. So the dashboard is there to allow you to evaluate the status, the speed of the car, the height of the aircraft, all this sort of stuff, but it's specifically designed for the purposes of control. The status report, on the other hand, tends to be to keep stakeholders informed. It's about progress, it's about finances, it's about progress issues, timelines and so on. May well be used in the portfolio management type functions in a PMO. But basically what you can see is that the dashboard is an internal thing that is about the learning of the team. The dashboard is about control, and the status report is about people outside the team. So an information radiator displays data irrelevant to the team members. The radiator may encourage interaction between team members, and it may increase the transparency for those outside the team. You know, when you're walking past a team area, I've done that in Barclays and ABSA and JP Morgan and various other places, you can get a picture of what the team is doing. It may not be a complete picture, but it gives it makes for that team, it makes their outcomes explicit, and it allows them to illustrate progress towards the goal. It may or may not have some degree of what I'll call progression metrics. It may also be used to remind the team of what they've learned. So I've been reading a book called Does It Make the Boat Go Faster? And the Boat Go Faster talks about an evidence board to remind the teams what they've achieved and what their goals are and so on. And that's a very good use of this particular Agile Radiator. And so therefore, it's all at a glance. It's all there. They don't have to go digging into drawers or materials. It's stuff that they could stick on a board physically. Pre-COVID, they would have done this on a board. Now, more likely, they might do it on a Miro or a Mira board. And its purpose is transparency, and transparency for each of the team members rather than transparency for those outside of the team. I mean, transparency is an Agile value, and it means sort of acting in a way so that others can actually see. And the radiator is typically not for people outside the team, but for those inside to know what it's about. In Scrum, for example, we've got the values of the 3 pillars of Scrum, and it gives us a good picture of what's happening. The 3 pillars, you know, along with inspection and adaptation, basically what the Scrum's saying is that the team is sharing with each other and with without those outside what's actually happening, and it might actually have some details of time and cost and value and so on. In extreme programming, we start to talk about these concepts of an informative workspace. And interestingly, when I went into ABSA in South Africa looking at their Agile teams, they had boards. They had at the top of the board, there was a clock. That clock was there to remind them that they were 10 days or 5 days from their next release. It was counting down. It gives them the focus. That clock was never there for management to look at. It's never there for anybody to make any judgments. It's about the team using the data in order to control itself and so on. So the radiators enable team learning. This is what I really wanted to say. You know, the team is fundamentally in Agile. What we're trying to do fundamentally is to harness the energy, the emotions, and the creativity of the entire team. And the team that is working together and working on how and sort of considering how they're working as a team is a team that enables the organization also to learn, but because obviously organizations are made up of people and teams. That informative workspace allows people to understand why they're doing work, how they are working, and their progression towards their goals and the desired outcome. The evidence on that board basically shows their accomplishments, and it assists with building confidence. Now that's kind of interesting because I was really digging into this self-esteem piece and building that team, and the team that has confidence and is self-assured actually allows them to deliver more and basically have a positive view about what their outcomes can be, and they feel in control and so on. They go kill, of course, there's going to be disagreements and they're going to have problems, but basically if the team's got a high esteem, then the team can actually start to deal with that constructively and so on. So basically what I'll say to you is that the Radiator is a tool which is used by the team to remind themselves where they're going. It's a tool that reminds the team what they've how they're working, what their current velocity is, perhaps whether they've got escape defects, what the status is of their latest experiment. It gives them all sorts of tools, techniques, and so on in a visual way that allows them to build confidence and be open and basically be open with themselves and also with others. So it's a whole, there's a whole concept behind this Radiator, which I think we probably need to think of and think about how we using that and making greater use of it as a team. Let's look at a dashboard for a minute and let's think about the dashboards. Dashboards, if you picture the car dashboard or the dashboard in a cockpit of an aircraft when driving or when flying, that dashboard gives data which allows control. The dashboard provides indicators which when taken together enables the team to make decisions, the pilot to make decisions, the driver to make decisions. You can look at the dashboard on the car and think, I need some more petrol. You can look at the dashboard in an aircraft and say, we're at the wrong height or whatever. And it allows the dashboard allows the team to make decisions about what they're going to change and how they're going to change it and so on. So the dashboard is there to enable decision making, right? So the dashboard should provide, in an agile context, both lead and lag indicators so that the team can decide what they need to adjust in order to get to their goals. At the end of the day, the dashboard may be part of the Radiator, or likely, but it's more likely that it could be made up of information from Jira and other sources. For example, the dashboard might include what are called progression metrics. These are metrics which are monitoring the business outcome. So if the team's goal is to improve customer satisfaction, they might be monitoring on a quarterly basis or more frequent basis what the level of customer satisfaction is. So if they release something and they can actually see what the impact of that release is on the NPS score and customer satisfaction. Equally, if they were doing cost reduction, they might monitor, let's say it's sales transactions, they might monitor the average cost of sales transactions and use progression metrics to establish whether they've actually reduced the cost of processing a sale or whether they've increased it. Of course, the other problem that you've got is that when you're starting to use progression metrics, there are things outside the team which could influence those numbers. So if, for example, transaction volumes fall significantly, the average cost per transaction could go up. So this might allow the team to consider what the business metric is around what they are trying to achieve, and then allow them to pivot. So if you think about pivoting is changing direction. So therefore, this is giving them that degree of control that they need over their particular outcome. So therefore, I think that dashboards are important because of this element of control, and they need to be immediate and they need to be at a glance. Otherwise, we don't get this plan, do, study, adjust. The dashboard is what the team should be looking at when they're looking at the study element of things. So agile activities can't be managed using the same tools and techniques as a waterfall. This plan, do, study, adjust is the control element. And to paraphrase Deming said you can't fix what you can't measure. So an agile team has to decide what elements of their activity do they wish to control, or what do they need to be aware of. And this may change over time as the team matures and as the team starts to deploy iteratively. That pivot is important because we have all said that, you know, the team can adjust itself quickly. We talk about late changes coming in a life cycle and so on. So what they might do is start to think about what's valued by the stakeholders, the users, the wider market, and the main goal of a pivot is to avoid waste and to bring the project back or the activity back on track. So if you can imagine our project or our activity is like a yacht sailing across the Atlantic, perhaps in the Ark or one of the other Atlantic crossing activities, you would plot a course on a chart, but the wind and the tide will take you either side of that. And what will happen is, in order to make sure that they end up in Barbuda or wherever they Antigua or wherever they're going, they would adjust that course on maybe 2 or 3 times a day to actually avoid missing the island altogether. So just in the same way, the team is looking at the data that's in the dashboard so that it can decide whether it needs to adjust or not. So actually, the important thing is that the team, particularly if they're looking at business outcomes, the team might need to decide what data they need to have. And one of the difficult things might be getting the right management information to allow them to pivot. One of my PMO friends said to me that basically there is on Agile teams, you might get the concept of what she called reverse reporting. So, for example, the people in marketing might need to evaluate the marketplace to see the situation is occurring and give data to an Agile team such that it can then start to pivot. At least that data might go to the product owner to start to change what they're doing or what they're thinking, or they might be looking at adding extra functionality in order to counter the actions of a competitor. All sorts of different things the data might be needed. So what I'm thinking is that we need to think about what is the context of this particular team, what's the business outcome that they need to achieve, and then what are the metrics that they would be reasonable for them to use in order to make sure that they're on track. And then the question becomes, where are they going to get the data? So there's a piece in here about not just the use of the metrics, but making sure that we get the right metrics to enable the team to deliver the outcome that the business requires. So what type of thing do you think would be on a dashboard? It will probably link to the team's OKRs. More often, just like it is in a car or in an aircraft, those dashboards are made up of graphical charts. So the graphical charts may be made up of burned up charts. You might be monitoring business value. You might be looking at that in terms of value points, and you might have to create that in order to get the data that's needed by the team. Sometimes teams just estimate the cost in story points or their effort in story points and forget about value. There's a tool called not value stream mapping, benefits mapping, that allows you to evaluate where the features are, which features generate the benefit that the organization has established in the lean business case. So that type of data might be needed. Progression metrics we've just talked about. Basically, the team are looking at the data to enable them to evaluate whether they're actually having the impact that they respect. Another thing that they may have is measurable improvements from the last retro, for example. So a retro might say, we think we're going to want to increase our average velocity from 60 story points per sprint to 65. So you would quite often see a metric which is showing that particular improvement or degradation of those numbers. So there would be a chart to show that. You might have a team that says we're getting too many escape defects, so there may be a chart which shows that type of information. Some of these charts will show current, there'll be barometers showing current positions. Some of those charts would look at trends over time. You might have operational and delivery risks appearing on a chart, reminding the team that their particular project has a significant operational risk element to it. It would be kind of fundamental, and that would be, are we seeing the volumes of transactions increasing? If that was a operational risk, if we thought that, let's say we're going to make a change and our operational risk was, if we can contain the current volume of transactions, then everything could be fine. But if we go through a ceiling level, you might have an operational risk where some people can't cope, or the systems can't cope, or whatever. So basically you're monitoring not just the delivery risks, but also the operational risk impacts. So summarizing, dashboards then are things presents the data that the team needs to look at for control. It gives the business data about so that the team can look at controlling and pivoting. It gives the operational data that they need, if that's what their context is. It gives them their own performance data so that they can start to adjust. So dashboards, I think, are kind of something which teams need to think about. I mean, most teams and most coaches I've seen have built dashboards out of Jira, and indeed it's highly tailorable. But I think that some teams, you might need to think about what the business outcomes are. I was looking at a team just recently, and their target was to improve the customer journey. And when we started to look at the business outcomes that they were getting, even in the stories, there was no reference to the customer journey, or the customer centricity was missing. So you would naturally start to question whether that team, and it was quite a big team, sort of like 100 odd people, were actually thinking about what their business outcome was, as opposed to thinking about story points and velocities and quality and so on. So I think this is an important part of the toolkit, and I think when we're talking about coaching, we need to start to think about how to make sure that the team has got the right data in order to deliver the outcomes that we're expecting from them. I think it's an important element to start to think about, are they focused on the right things? I think, when we go in as coaches, what I can see is that we talk them through Scrum, we might talk them through BDD, we might talk them through estimation techniques, we might talk them through a whole variety of different things, but I don't think we naturally look at whether they've got the data to be able to pivot. And I don't think as coaches we start to really think about where that data is going to come from and the sources of that data. I did a job for a South African bank quite a long time ago, and we were looking at the outcomes in the business case that were defined in the business case, and comparing that to the outcomes that the projects had actually achieved. When we did that measurement, we found that they had only achieved about 28% of the measurable benefits that were identified in the business case. Quite a lot of that miss was because the management information that the teams would need in order to verify that the benefit had actually been reached and achieved was missing, and so therefore I think that the fact that the team doesn't have the data is a fundamental issue. If the business objective for the team is to, I'll pick an easy one, improve net promoter score or customer satisfaction, then that team needs to have that data on a fairly regular basis. And maybe some organizations only measure like every 6 months, maybe only annually, but they would need it more frequently than that in order to evaluate where their latest releases or iterations is having the desirable goal for those customers and so on. So this dashboard, the is used for control. The first presentation of the Teams Radiator was used for team learning and to identify that they're team working, and it's all about coordination between team, making sure that they've got a same vision of the future or where they are or where they're going. So it's about the learning side, but this is about the team controlling. So let's start to look at status reports, and I think it's fairly obvious what status reports, but nevertheless, an Agile team typically defines its status during the sprint review meeting or the same type of meeting at a program level or release train level. Sometimes it's called an inspect and adapt meeting. Those meetings, I'm not saying that those meetings should not occur. I'm also not saying that everybody that needs to know the status of the project should also turn up at the meeting, because sometimes that's simply not feasible. So basically what we're saying is that not everybody that needs a status update may be able to attend a meeting. For example, I mean, we might have a team here in London, but the stakeholder or the primary sponsor of that might be in New York, or we might have a team in India. So those people can't be physically there. The other thing about meetings is that they don't obviously provide an audit trail, and status reports quite often in certain industries, points either internal audit or external audit, or the regulators needs an evaluation of where their project activities are. Okay, so basically what we've got is that status report provides the formal communication from the team. It summarizes the progress and the challenges, and the data should be exactly the same as reviewed by the stakeholders in the sprint review meeting. So an Agile status report is a formal communication from the team, which is used organization-wide for oversight, governance, and coordination. Now, quite a lot of Agilists and Agile evangelists go, oh, well, the team's all important and everything else it all involves around the team, and we shouldn't have to give data out to the organization and all of this sort of type statements. But no team, in my view, is an island. It's part of an organization, and that organization obviously needs to manage and control its affairs professionally, and the team needs to respect that. And when we're talking about roles and responsibilities, particularly if we're looking at things like Scrum only mentions the 3 roles of, product owner, team member, and Scrum Master. But typically you'll need somebody who's also going to do the report. Okay, it might be the product owner, it might be the Scrum Master, but we'll need to give those guys that role and make it clear that who is responsible for doing that. The status report is very interesting because the team is collectively responsible and accountable. So previously in waterfall, in old money, we would have said that the status report comes from the project manager, and therefore the PMO or the governance function would talk to the project manager. Typically, we don't have a project manager, and the output, the report, is coming from the team. And if the PMO starts to want to know more about projected outcomes and so on, then when we're talking about timelines, the timelines and the prioritization and the release plan belongs to the product owner. When they're starting to talk about efficiency, that all responsibility lies with the Scrum Master. Some PMOs get quite uncomfortable with the fact that they may have to talk to more than one person, but it's a fact that we do have split responsibilities instead of a single point of contact for PMOs and governance and so on. So let's just look. I thought this was a great picture, 2 kids with a bit of string, and that sort of summarizes quite often the way that people see status reports. It's a bit of a string, it's something which is thought of as a last resort and so on, but the status report has to probably duplicate some, if not most, of the data that's on the dashboard, and maybe some of the data that's on the Radiator. It is definitely a replication of the data that is provided in the sprint review, meaning that that sprint review is more than just a demo. And people tend to loosely call the sprint review a demo or show and tell, and it's much more than that, because it should include the review of the metrics and the financials and the risks, and based on that data is data that would go into the team's retrospective. By some Agile purist, having a status report could be defined as waste, and because well, it's not needed by the team, so therefore it's waste. However, when you're looking at value stream design, and I mentioned that I've been looking at the value stream consultant for disciplined Agile role. Every value stream has its constraints, and it also has its controls. And these constraints and controls are the things which allow the parent organization to operate and function. So in that operation and function, finances need to be controlled, operational risks need to be managed, and so on. So this duplication is in fact not waste, but it is part of the organization, enabling it to be function. And as far as the team is concerned, they are being responsible corporate citizens by providing that information to the wider organization. The other use of that status report may be to justify additional funding or to fund the activities of the team. We all know that the Agile portfolio management actually splits up funding for teams into tranches, and so therefore no team is funded for, let's say, a year. They're looking at funding by probably large increments, quarters, but sometimes it's less than a quarter. So therefore what they might be doing is looking at the portfolio management process to look at the benefits of the next piece of work that's proposed by the team, and also the costs that are being proposed by the team, and they may decide then to pivot the portfolio to actually move the activities off this particular activity for that team and move it on to another activity for the same team. So this status report has more than one use and more than one impact in terms of providing the link between the team and the activities and the lean business case. I think that a lot of people think that Agile just happens, but the fact is most corporate governance insists on having at least some justification for expense, and therefore the status report naturally links back to that business case. So status reports then provides that formal communication. It provides feedback to remote stakeholders. It provides governance functions with the ability to operate. And so, I mean, I've got the three alternatives here, the three PowerPoint, the display, the radiator. We've got the dashboards and the status reports. What people's views? What do you think about this? Is this on the money, or is everybody looking at the dashboards that the teams are using to pivot, or what's happening? Silence.
John, I was going to say that I think if you're in an organisation where they've had a quite mature lean culture, I think the adoption seems to be a little easier, because people are used to teams taking responsibility and being accountable for delivery and using visual management techniques. I think where the organisation has not had any sort of exposure, I think it's much harder. And I think that I see generally people worrying about a loss of control. That's what I see.
Yeah, yes. And that it tends to be middle management, yes?
Yeah, I agree, definitely.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting, because what I was going to move on to was the fact that these these radiators, dashboards, and status reports provide transparency. They provide transparency, which in some organizations can be uncomfortable because management don't like transparency, or they don't like to know what the team doesn't like to give management the right picture. You know, there's sort of this culture of hiding things and secret and only letting things out at the last minute. There's concepts of actually sort of massaging data to get to senior management and things like this. But there's a concept which I thought was very interesting, which I came across while doing this, and it was something called radical transparency. And radical transparency is a phrase which is used to about the openness of communications in our lives, and sometimes that's politics, sometimes that's around things like medical history, things like just basically being open with people. The interesting thing is that openness is obviously one of the key pillars of Scrum, but I don't think it's something which is really pushed in terms of the Agile values and so on. And so radical transparency might involve, for example, posting data or making sure that stakeholders are aware of your status using the OKRs, so the KRs might be updated on a regular basis so that people are absolutely sure where you are, and they might look at maybe the deltas between the OKR this year and the OKR last year or last month or last quarter or so on. Basically, it's about having the use of clear and information and data going out. And it's said that radical transparency is a prerequisite for an organization to trust a team, or that trust is a prerequisite for the team to be given the opportunity to deliver radical innovation or radical solutions. So, and I thought that was kind of interesting, because when you think about it, if you can't see what's going to happen to a team, why would you give it your suitable, critical, super project? You'll want to know that the team that receives that and gets that information, or at least gets that task, is one where you're going to know what's going to be happening and so on. I thought it was a really interesting concept, and I hadn't really thought about it before until this point. But that link between openness and transparency and organizational trust, I think is really an interesting dimension that I hadn't really thought about. Am I talking rubbish, or do you think people agree with me generally?
It sounds like that trust is really absolutely critical to move more quickly and to get things done as an organization that needs to achieve outcomes that might themselves be changing faster than in the past. So that trust element is really important. And at the moment, I think it was Jane mentioning lean organizations. The problem is, if everything is still really old money for middle managers in terms of the organization, that loss of control can be proven true to them quite often by teams who are starting out. Sometimes you might give teams the opportunity to work on what they see as important, and they might decide that technical debt is the most important thing, and they're probably right, but that would be a huge shock to the system for middle management and senior management, because they ignore that all the time. So all of a sudden the outcomes are out the window. It's all about the technical debt. Is that right? Is that wrong? We could talk about that. But the point is that transition from one mode of thinking to the next needs that trust. So this might help. It's still not an easy road, is it? It's just still, I don't know, 50-50.
Yeah, I agree.
There's a fantastic book by Stephen Covey's son called The Speed of Trust, which really unpacks that particular topic. And what I was going to say in response to what I've been listening to here is that I think by far the process, the tools, the techniques when it comes to Agile can be learnt, and they're not that difficult. I think the hardest thing is the cultural change, the mindset change that just about everyone has to go through, right from the top to the person in the team. And I think that for a lot of people is incredibly difficult.
I agree. One of the things we've done in my part of BT is that we quite often as coaches start up communities of practice for things like Scrum Masters and Scrum and product owners. We've actually got a community of practice for Agile for middle management, and we're using some of the stuff from Management 3.0, and we're also looking at these middle managers to reduce the level of organizational impediments that are happening with the teams. So it's really quite a positive thing to do. We dropped it for a few months, and I'm really disappointed that we've dropped it, but it's something which we plan to re-energize for the next quarter again. So that's one of the things that we're doing. Very interesting. Okay, well, two things I mentioned earlier on, that the lean book, you may have heard, and some of you will definitely have heard that I've been looking at how we could improve Scrum, and I was looking at some of my Agile teams to see how they were using Scrum, and I realized that perhaps on the particularly with novice teams, the areas that are incomplete, it's deliberately incomplete. I can't remember the intentionally incomplete in Scrum, are the actual areas that are needed for novice teams to be able to perform. So I started working in that space, and then suddenly realized that there was quite a lot that was missing, and things around the delivery process and so on that all the teams need, and things around the behavioral science elements. So what I've done is I've produced this Agile Line Out book. It's available on LeanPub, and basically I've gone back to the systems theory, I've gone back to behavioral science, and I've gone back to lean principles in order to come up with an alternative way of actually in an alternative framework. It's not bolted onto Scrum, although some of the principles could actually be used in Scrum. So it's there, and be great if you want to have a look at it, fine, and that'd be great. And if anybody's going to use it, then I'd love to get some feedback. It's an MVP at this stage. There's some gaps in it. It's definitely written with the idea of being able to apply Agile principles and Agile practices to non-IT teams. So so things like business transformation, things like post-acquisition type activities, merger activities, marketing strategy, and so on are all in there. I've also got a book which is available on Amazon, which is the Agile Coach's Cookbook, and that's available now for people to buy. It's got some of this material in it, but it was written 2 years ago, and the publishers, due to COVID, took nearly 15 months to publish it. So a lot of my thinking, a lot of my practices have moved on a little bit from there, and it may well be that we do an update to that. Last but not least, we've actually got a 14-week training program going to start in the autumn. I'm running this. I've got 70 people on the current cohorts in BT running this course, and it's been very successful. So if you wanted to know more about that, and I'm also in the process of getting it IC Agile accredited. So there's those three things that I would say to you, that are available for you if you want more data.